very big. It takes students a long time to get through it. So a student who's a low B1 is very different than a student who's a high B1. So if you just say my student's a B1, that doesn't tell me enough. I need to know more. I need more specific information. And that's what the GSE can give me. So what it is it has some downloadable objectives for different age groups and student groups. So you can go download it for free. You can also go to their toolkit, which is what this is on the right, and all of the objectives are there in the online digital format. So I could talk forever about the GSE. I've given whole presentations just about this because it's so useful, but I won't go into all of that detail today, but I will talk about why it's useful. So if we look at this goal, students can write a paragraph with a topic sentence, supporting details, and a concluding sentence. So my first question is, where is this on the CEFR? Because this is going to help me as I plan my lessons. So think to yourself, where do I think this is on the CEFR? The answer is, it is a B1, which is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe is an Aiken level 2. And in my time in Japan, in my reading also, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of schools, boards of education, maybe even mixed, think that when students leave high school, they should leave at a B1. So if that's the case, we need to think carefully about when we do this task. My guess is, and what I've observed, is that people are doing it too soon, when students are not ready for it. So what this means is, as teachers, if students aren't consistently and successfully writing at a B1 level, the goal of writing a full academic paragraph isn't realistic. Or maybe it's still something that's attainable, but you have to do some really serious scaffolding because they're not ready. They're not actually at a B1. So we have to go back to Stephen Krashen's theory of I+1. Students need an accessible challenge, which means it needs to be just above their reach. If a task is too far past their reach, they will struggle to meet the objective and their motivation will crash. So many times people ask me, how do you motivate your students? One major way that you don't motivate students is by asking them to do something that is way too difficult for them. They will not find any success and their motivation will crash. So planning, I know it's not very, there's not a lot of bling or like shiny diamonds to it, or it's not fun and exciting to talk about it, but planning your class really does affect all of these things like motivation. So what now? You need to assess your students' CEFR level. Of course, there are tests for that, but you can also do this informally. You can go to the GSE, for example, and download those lists, and you can look. They're divided by reading, writing, speaking, listening. And you can look and see, yeah, my students can do everything pretty well up until this point. Then you know their Cefr level. Then you need to start below B1 and work up to it. You need to scaffold your tasks very carefully. So you have to have a clear progression, step by step, to get to that goal. So you start with tasks at I+1 so that students can succeed. They can taste success. If they can't, they're going to give up and they're not going to be motivated. So if this is our goal, I want to show you what the GSE can do. So here are some can-do statements before B1. These are A1, A2. And if you notice, all of these talk about simple sentences. Also, look at the topics that they're writing about. Personal interests, someone's life and routines, a familiar object, and then into A2, what they and other people do about their feelings. So I'm going to bring my picture back in here because I want to show you my arms. There is something about what you're asking students to do. If they are learning how to write sentences and they're not good at it yet, that's difficult. So what you want to ask them to write about should be easier. That way they have vocabulary. They have an idea of the content. So they're not struggling to think of ideas. They have ideas. They're struggling to write clear sentences. So that's important. Okay, you don't want it to both be difficult. It's hard for them to write sentences. It's hard for them to think of vocabulary. It's too difficult at the same time. So you need to think about that as you're planning. Okay, so now let's move higher up. So now A2, A2 plus, B1, we're getting into grouped sentences. Can write short descriptive texts on familiar personal topics. Again, familiar topics, but we're putting the sentences together. Can write about everyday things in linked sentences. So linked sentences would be using things like first, next, after that. You're combining them with some of those transitions. And then we get into our task here. Our B1 can write a paragraph with the topic, sentence, and details, and then can write a concluding sentence. You'll note this is a little bit harder than the paragraph, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Another thing to note is here at B2, can write a strong topic sentence within a clear paragraph. Topic sentences are difficult. So this tells me that students are not going to be very good at it from the beginning. Maybe I need to give them some help with a topic sentence. Maybe we need to create it together. And then later I can expect really strong topic sentences. So all of this is really helpful data to help me scaffold my lesson plans. And this is something that if there are any administrators here that can make decisions about a whole program, this is important when you plan, let's say for high school from 9th through 12th grade. Maybe as a department, you say, okay, 9th and 10th grade, we're gonna work on sentences. Then maybe 11th and 12th grade, we're gonna focus on paragraphs and then essays. So it's important to think big picture in your program about how you're ordering these things, okay? And it also helps teachers if there's a plan in place like that. So to sum up this section about the Cefr, start with just sentences until students are confident and have them write about topics they're familiar with so they have vocabulary that they can use, that they know. Then when they're ready, start teaching the paragraph with familiar topics. Again, let me bring my picture back in here. So again, if they're starting the paragraph, that's a new skill that's difficult for them. You don't want to start with a very academic topic. You want to have an easier topic while they're learning topic sentence, supporting details, concluding sentence. When they understand that, and if you look at the last bullet, then you can switch it. Oh yeah, we understand the paragraph now. We understand what to do. So now you can raise the difficulty of what they're writing about. Okay, so start off easy task or hard task, easy topic. Then they can do the task, so have a harder topic. When I first learned this changed my teaching. It made so much sense to me because I could see how it affected my students. So this is heavily researched, but it is also heavily researched and utilizes teacher feedback. And I have used this in my classes and it makes sense. It may seem a little strange at the beginning, but it really does work. All I always have trouble finding my cursor. There it is. Okay, so let's move on to examples of what I mean by sentence level. So in my last webinar, if you were with us, I showed the mini book. This is what's here. It's genius because it's so simple. Here I did a grammar focus. I talked about this in my last webinar, but what's great is that it's low tech. It's one piece of paper that you fold into a book. Okay, and you could do this for 100 different topics or ways in a classroom. You don't have to make it so small, but here you're focusing on sentences. For all of these, you could also use these for speaking. So you could use it for show and tell. You could have them read their book to another person or to a lower class, to elementary students. Okay. So that's one idea. Here is a Padlet that I did with my students this week. So this was our first week of school at a school where I'm teaching, and I wanted to know what my students could do with writing. It's like a high beginner class. And so I used a Padlet, padlet.com if you're not familiar, and I had them do a digital show and tell. So I had them all find an item that was important to them. And I love this one here in the middle. She brought hand sanitizer because it's so important to us now because of COVID-19. So what I had them do is they uploaded a picture and then they wrote sentences describing the picture. It's really easy. And we did it. And then I had them go back and I had them proofread and edit, and I had them talk with a partner about their sentences. Were there any problems with subjects and verbs? So Padlets work really, really well. It's also good because they can do it at home, and then you could discuss it in class. So you don't have to take class time to do it. And it also allows for a little creativity, and it's a little more fun than just pencil and paper. So I really love Padlets. It's $8 a month. So what is 800 yen a month? So it's not expensive, and it's really, really helpful and works well with students. Don't rush through the sentence level stage. So I've worked with Japanese textbooks, and you have units, right, that have a different topic. I would, if you're at that stage, that A1, A2 stage, then I would just do something different every unit at the sentence level, but make it interesting, make it different. Do something different with sentences, but still keep it at that sentence level until they become really confident with that. All right, so now students, let's say they're ready for the paragraph. Let's talk about how to break down the paragraph writing process. So 4 steps. You have the topic sentence, supporting sentences, and concluding sentence. Take time for each of these steps. Don't rush through these. So for the topic, and a lot of these, you can incorporate a lot of speaking. Spend time brainstorming possible topics. So if you look at the picture behind, this is from a colleague of mine. She used poster paper and did a gallery walk. So you'll see at the top, we have different topics. So she did school uniform, studying abroad, children and cell phones, and I don't know what that one was over there. But students went around and they brainstormed ideas for those topics. This helps students narrow in on a topic they like. Okay, and when students were walking around, they were talking, they were discussing and interacting with each other, which is always, always good. Get as many ideas as possible. I've used journal writing for this process. So I've had students brainstorm 3 or 4 different topics and write about it. A think, pair, share is always good. So you think about it, you share it with a partner, and then together you share it with the class. This helps so that students don't feel like they have to say things on their own. They're doing it with a partner. So get them speaking at this level, brainstorm ideas. So then once you have your topic, you move to the topic sentence. So I would probably spend a day on the topic, or a half a day. Or if you use some online tools, you can start the discussion online and finish it in class. This is why online tools are so helpful, even if schools aren't shut down. It's really important to use them so that you can maximize your class time, because you don't have a lot of class time. So with the topic sentence, my first question is always, what do you want to say about the topic? That is your topic sentence. So you have your topic, which is a word or phrase. What do you want to say about it? And that's your topic. One topic can have many different topic sentences, which is great, because I always like to give my class maybe one topic and then have each student choose their own topic sentence to write about. Any time that you could give your students the chance to choose their own topic to write about or topic sentence to write about, please do so. Giving students ownership of what they write about increases motivation. I'll give you a story from my own teaching. A few years ago, when I was teaching a higher level writing class, we were doing opinion essay writing. And the first couple of years when I was teaching it, I had to make them do the same topic, and it was terrible. It was terrible for them. It was terrible for me, because I had to read dozens of essays, long essays about the same thing over and over again. It was terrible. And students weren't having any fun either. So I decided to change it. And I said, you can talk about whatever you want. I guided them a little within, some boundaries. But one student was a squash player, and he chose the opinion, squash should be an Olympic sport. He came into class one day, I'll never forget it, and he was so excited, and he was surprised. He said, Jenny, I spent all night researching my topic for my paper, for my English class, and he couldn't believe that he did that. But he did it because he was personally interested in the topic. So anytime that you can do that and let them write about something they like, it's definitely worth it, and I would suggest it. So for example, with the topic and topic sentences, what I like is you could all be on the same page. You can all be talking about climate change, but you can let students pick a direction they want to go in. So climate change is rapidly increasing, has caused significant changes in temperatures worldwide, is responsible for an increase in natural disasters. Climate change is nothing new. That's a very controversial opinion, which is great when students say something a little controversial is fine. So what's good about this is that you have options depending on your student's level. So maybe they're at a level with their critical thinking when they can choose their own topic sentence. That's great. That's what we want. But maybe they're not there yet with their critical thinking. So maybe you have a bank and you give them an option of 10 different topic sentences, and they can choose which one they feel like they can write about most successfully. So you have options for how you differentiate what you do with your students. You can give them total freedom, or you can give them some boundaries. It just depends on your students. So the next stage is planning. It's a very important stage, but it gets overlooked a lot of times. So you could have students plan their ideas visually in a visual map or a traditional outline. At this stage, it's a really good time to discuss the difference between major details and minor details. And I like to give color-coded models. So when you look at this model, it's just a bunch of words, and students can't really see the pieces very well. This is where I like to use color. So, topic sentence is in red. Baseball is a very popular sport in Japan for people of all ages. My major details are in blue. First, little children love to play. Also, adults like to play baseball. Finally, people of all ages like to watch professional baseball teams play both in person and on television. And then minor details are the examples, how you expand your ideas and support your ideas. What I love about this, at least for all of my years of teaching, is that the purple, The minor details. This is where students can't write enough. So I like to show them, look how much purple there is. The purple is the bulk of the paragraph. Most of the paragraph is the purple. This is your goal. You need lots of purple. If there's only blue, that's not enough. There's not details to support your ideas. So I love to use color when I talk about this. And then when I show them examples of how to do their outlining or visual mapping, I keep those same colors, okay, to keep consistency. You don't have to have the same amount of minor details, but this is just a guide. And so you can do a traditional outline as well, and you can still give them a sample with the colors as well. Spend time on this stage. Don't rush through this stage, because this is where the ideas get solidified. And this is the time to give them feedback, either in person or online. This is another time where I would suggest using an online tool, because you don't have a lot of time in class or any time. I've been to not your classes specifically, but I've been to so many Japanese classrooms that have 40 students. You don't have time to talk to each student and give them comprehensive feedback. But maybe you split the task with your ALT and you give them feedback on an online program. That way you can give feedback and take your time. They can listen to it or watch it, however, at home, and then they can bring their questions in class. It's a real time saver, because this stage is so important for them to get feedback. Because in all of my years of teaching English to people that are not native speakers, is that this is the problem here: linear reading. A lot of times they have a major idea and then their support is off somewhere else. It doesn't flow, it doesn't fit. And this is where the US or the Western style of writing is very different than many other countries, including Japan. Western writing is very linear. My students often call it boring, and it is, but it's very linear. Everything has to line up and it's very obvious. And so this is where a lot of times my students have trouble. So at this stage, if I catch it, I'll say, okay, let's spend a little more time. Let's go back. Let's redo this section and make sure that we have some linear reasoning. Everything lines up. Your examples support your major details well. They don't go off in some other direction. I also assess this stage. I give them a grade for it. And I assess it for clear organization and sufficient ideas. So do you have enough ideas? So clear organization and enough ideas to really support your point. So don't be afraid to assess this. I think it's really important. Okay, then the next step is to write the paragraph without the concluding sentence. And this one you can do, you don't have to do, but this is something I would recommend you give it a try. So they write the topic sentence and supporting details, and then you assess it for content, organization, vocabulary, and then grammar, but in a focused way. And by focused grammar, what I mean is you don't make them accountable to have every single thing right grammatically in a paragraph. That's a lot. So what I would recommend is that for each assignment, you have their focus. So maybe you tell yours and show them the rubric ahead of time. It's very important. So maybe you say, okay, in this paragraph, I'm going to be looking at your verb tenses. Maybe you're going to be looking at simple present and simple past. So you mark off points for any of those errors. Maybe you mention, oh, you missed an article or you missed a plural if you want to, but you're not going to reduce their points for that. Okay, having focused grammar target is really helpful. So they have almost all of the paragraph done, but not the concluding sentence. So they get that done. They feel good about that. You feel good about that. You move on to teach the concluding sentence. So why teach this separately? So the research in the GSE shows that it's higher on the difficulty scale. It's not much higher, but it's higher. And this makes sense to me because when you're teaching the concluding sentence, when you're writing a concluding sentence, you're talking about paraphrasing, which talks about synonyms and word order. That's really difficult. And so it's good to get the rest of the paragraph finished and solid before you go on to the concluding sentence. So the way that I would teach it is I would give examples of how to paraphrase a topic sentence. So from our example, baseball is a very popular sport. It's not exactly the same sentence, but Japanese people love the game of baseball. It's a very different sentence, but the meaning is the same. But they have to do a lot with it. They have to paraphrase it, change it. So I would give them lots of practice paraphrasing sample topic sentences. So I would give them lots of sample sentences and make sure that they understand what they need to do with paraphrasing. Then when they feel good about that, you feel like they understand, they can go back to their paragraph and add their concluding sentence. And you can grade that. Again, this is a little bit of a different idea, but I have found it to be really helpful in my own teaching as well. And then you just repeat. So like I said before, you have units in your textbook that have different topics. Each unit, have them write a paragraph and just do it over and over again. Maybe you have them, share it in a different way, or you do it online on a Padlet and, maybe try to change it. But have them do it over and over again until they become comfortable and confident. This is so important to focus on the paragraph, because if they can write a paragraph, they can write an essay. So many times we start too soon with the essay, and it's terrible because they didn't have sufficient time and practice to really get good at paragraph writing. So yes, you have an introduction and a conclusion, but an essay is a compilation of many paragraphs. So you really need to spend time on this paragraph step. Okay, so to wrap up, these are the things that I would suggest for you. First, create an environment that considers English writing as one useful alternative that they need. Not the best way or not better than another way, but really just tell them this is useful to you in your future in an international context. This will help you. It's a tool in your toolbox. Then I recommend using the CEFR to figure out where your students are and where they need to go, and to scaffold the can-do objectives to get them there. And then I recommend that you really break down the steps of the process and don't rush through those steps, because each one is important. And when students, you see that they're having trouble, that's when you stop and you reevaluate, you reteach, you make a new plan to go forward. So many times I've seen teachers, and I've done it myself, where this is my plan, I'm going to go forward with it. We have to be responsive to how our students do with what we're giving them. And we need to be ready to stop, change our plan, reevaluate, and move forward. So those are my suggestions for you. And now we have time for Q&A. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we have a little bit of time here to go through those. Okay, I have a question about the speed of writing. One of my students asked me how she could write faster. Will you give me your perspective on this? Okay, I would first ask her, I would first as a teacher think about how well is she writing to begin with. So you know, is she doing well with writing? Getting faster is not as important as really learning how to write well. If it's academic, if it's just writing in general, I would say if you want to write faster, you need to write a lot. I would urge your students to give them, you know, daily practice in a journal. Keep a journal and just write as often as they can, because then writing is a skill. It's almost like a muscle. The more you do it, the easier it gets. And so really just practice, practice, practice. That's what I would recommend. Okay, so the rubric of writing to assess, I can share. It really depends on your students and the task, what level they are. So I can give some samples of a rubric, and maybe that's another event that I could do. We could talk about rubrics, but I hesitate to give you a rubric because it's not one size fits all. So we can maybe explore some possible ways to talk about rubrics in the future. Okay, another question. How do I give feedback to students on their planning stage? So for planning, like I said, I'm really looking for organization, and I'm looking for sufficient ideas. So I make sure that they fill out some kind of visual map or an outline. And then I can really clearly see whether they have organization and whether they have enough ideas. So then I would look at what they've done, and then I would talk with them about what I'm seeing. I'll say, well, this example isn't very strong. Can you think of a more specific example to show that? And so it's very narrative. It's very, you know, it's a dialogue. And that's why if you had time in person, it's great, but I would use those online tools and I would give them a lot of detail. Here you said this. Is there another example you could give? Or that's actually off topic. So let's think about what you really need to say to give that example. So that's what I do. How many lesson hours is a good question. Face-to-face, do you think an average is needed to finish a writing assignment? I think that depends on what you're doing outside of class. I think how you're giving homework, if you're using online tools, if you're not, I would recommend that you do that, because I think that one of the major challenges in Japan is that you don't have enough face-to-face time with your students. So that's when I would say use online tools to do some of the planning, to do the work, to do some feedback. That way you can utilize your class time to complete an assignment. So again, I hesitate to give a lesson hour number because it depends on the students, it depends on the assignment, and how many days a week you have. For a paragraph, if you are meeting 3 or 4 times a week, or 3 times, or 2 or 3 times a week is probably more realistic for Japan. I would say 2 weeks, but that would be using some online tools as well. Some support outside of class. I wouldn't rely just on class time. On the first stage of paragraph writing, they can pick the diary topics. So their topic, yeah, if that works for you, anytime you give them a chance to pick a topic, I would do that. But it might make more sense if you want to tie it to your lesson in the textbook to have a topic from the text, or you can decide maybe there's many topics from the unit. So for example, one unit I saw a lot was Malala. So you could talk together, say, this was our unit. What are some topics we could write about? And brainstorm together different topics. Then maybe they choose their own topic, or maybe you say, okay, we're going to talk about this topic, but everyone can do their own topic sentence. It depends. But at some point, I would give them some choice in what they're writing about. I hope that helps. I'm teaching at high school using a reading textbook. How can I modify the textbook materials into writing lessons? Very, very simply, like I just said with Malala, you could say, okay, this is our topic, So think about what might be interesting for them to write about. So like for Malala, what's interesting about that is she was 16 when she was shot. So one thing that I always suggested is make it applicable to the students. How can you apply that or make it relate or connect with their life and have that direct into writing topics? Use the textbook topics to guide you into writing topics. You should really be integrating everything. Your speaking topics, writing topics can all go together with what they're reading. Takes a lot of time to give feedback for student writing. How do you manage the time? Yeah, it does take a lot of time. And so there's no way around that, but this is where I would really train and utilize ALTs. And this is where you have to work together to make sure you're on the same page for what kind of feedback you're giving. So if you can do that, I would utilize helpers to help you. Otherwise, the more specific a rubric is, the faster your feedback will be because you have a specific guide. And that's why I also talk about not grading for everything with grammar. That takes too long and it's not helpful. So if you have a focus in your rubric, you have a focus for your grading. Unfortunately, there's no great way to make it quick, but the more you do it and the more you utilize these online tools, if you give oral feedback using an online tool, for me, that is faster than writing everything out. So that's something that you might look into doing. Okay, the topic, I think we answered that. Is it reasonable to set the condition of the amount of document, like in about 15 sentences for junior high? Yeah, especially I would definitely think for junior high, I would make sure, are they ready at their Cefr level for paragraph writing? Because I would say most junior high students are not at a B1. So I would even do a shorter paragraph to start. I would start with maybe 8 to 10. It depends on where your students are and how well they're writing sentences at the sentence level. How do you give them grammatical feedback? So again, I would start with a focus, and I like to do footnotes on if they're doing a typed word paper, where, you know, in Word, you can do a footnote, so a number, and then the comments at the bottom. It makes it a little clearer. So technically, that's how I actually do the feedback. And then I also have a key that I give them at the beginning of every year with abbreviations. So if there's a problem with subject-verb agreement, it's SVAGR. Punctuation is punct. I have, and everyone can have their own abbreviation list, but set your own list, give it to the students that they can have to look at and do abbreviations for grammar errors. That's what I would do. Would I allow students to use Grammarly? I would say no. I don't think that helps them learn the grammar. And Grammarly can be wrong. I think it's a like spell check or grammar check in Word or Grammarly, I think might be a good thing to do as your ending. Like, I think professionals should use it, but I wouldn't encourage students to use it. Let me see how many we have time for. So how can you tell when students are ready to transition from sentences to paragraphs? I would say if you can tell that they feel confident, if you can raise the difficulty level of what they're writing about, if they're not making many errors, I would move on. How do you, okay, another grammar one? Yeah, so another question about topic sentence. I understand that teachers set a topic. A teacher doesn't have to, but they can. But who makes the topic sentence? That's up to you. And like I said before, it's up to you depending on how confident your students are with creating a topic sentence. I worked with a teacher in Tokyo. The students could not do it. And she was spending time and time again. I'm like, they're not ready for it. So let's go back, give them a topic sentence, and let's move on to the supporting details. So you need to depend on what you know of your own students and scaffold and give them support where you need it. Or maybe you give them the beginning of the sentence and they complete it. So it depends on your students. How are we on time? Maybe one more. In the free version of Padlet, students don't have to have their name on it unless they add it. So if you look at my Padlet, there were no names on it. I knew who they were because later we did it together, but they don't have to have their name on it. We have lots of rubric questions. So maybe that's a follow-up. But I think we are out of time. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. These are thoughtful questions. Your students are lucky to have you. So I hope this helped, and good luck with your classes and your writing teaching. Thank you.